Okay, today we are going to talk about the history of the Supreme Court. We're not going to go into a ton of detail, but we need to make sure that you know a couple of things about a few of our older courts so that we can explain different philosophies and the ways that laws are made, that policies are shaped by what the Supreme Court does. Here we see this is Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court in the 80s by President Reagan. And so she's a very important figure in our Supreme Court history. She is the first woman on the court, was the critical swing judge for a long time in the 1990s and 2000s. We couldn't do anything without our objective for the day. So our objective, what we want to accomplish today, we're going to describe developments in Supreme Court history. We need to do this so that we can mostly explain the context in which things are happening today. So like all of the arguments about the Supreme Court are traced back to these developments since the middle of the 1900s. And we want to make sure that we understand why the Supreme Court is doing things the way that it is today. So we're going to answer the question, how has the Supreme Court developed? And if we're able to explain developments in Supreme Court history, we'll better understand how the court is making rulings today. First, we're going to go back to really, really old Supreme Courts. There are a few things we need to know about the earliest courts in the United States. There's our boy John Marshall, our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that we care about. And there is the Supreme Court building being built. This is actually it's the newest building of the three branches. The poor Supreme Court, they used to, for the first 100 years, they operated in the basement of the Senate. So sad. But now they have this nice, beautiful building. It makes them an equal branch and equally important. So we'll start all the way back at the beginning with the Marshall Court. This is not the first Supreme Court. He's the third Chief Justice, but it is very, very early in the Supreme Court. This is starting in the time of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. And so this is the most important court because it changes the role of the Supreme Court and really expands the power of the national government and the power of the Supreme Court. So we're going to take a look at a couple of decisions from court cases that you guys know. But this is the Supreme Court under John Marshall is really expanding its role as a branch of government by exercising judicial review for the first time. And then it is also going to expand the role of the government by the way that it interprets the Constitution in terms of the Commerce Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause. So important decisions that come from the Marshall Court. These are three cases that you know. We have talked about these early in the year. Marbury versus Madison. This is the most important Supreme Court case we've got because it establishes judicial review. So this is a case that expands the power of the Supreme Court. It gives the court a much bigger role in the national government. Also, way back, you guys should remember Gibbons versus Ogden. That was our court case about the steamboats in New York and New Jersey. So this was an interpretation of the Commerce Clause. And what the ruling here meant was that basically any economic activity can be regulated by commerce. So this really expanded Congress's power to make policies. And you guys know McCulloch versus Maryland, also from way back earlier in the year. But that was the court case about the bank. And so that court case is important because it really expands Congress's power under the Necessary and Proper Clause, but also it interprets the Supremacy Clause. And so it ensures that national government policies are always going to be superior to state policies. So it expands all of these cases expand the powers of the national government. All right, here's a name you probably remember from U.S. history class. This is a real bum of a Supreme Court justice here. This is Roger B. Taney. Now, philosophically, he has a much more limited view of national power. So under his control of the Supreme Court, this is the first time that the court ever actually overturned a national government policy since Marbury versus Madison. So it really went 50 years of the Supreme Court constantly siding with the national government. But Taney wants to limit the power of the national government, and so he usually has sided with state governments in opposition to the national government. And so that is fine by itself, but this is happening in the period leading up to the Civil War. So there's a lot of sectional tension here, and his decisions are encouraging that by giving the states more power to cause more separation between the states. So there's really one big court case that we're going to think about with Roger B. Taney, and it is the worst Supreme Court decision that we've got. All right, droopy old Roger B. Taney, he is the Chief Justice, and the case that we associate with him is Dred Scott versus Sanford. This is the Supreme Court's probably lowest point, although there are quite a few of those that we'll end up looking at. But what this case ruled was that descendants of African slaves could not be citizens. That's the ruling of the court. What that means is that no people in the United States of African descent were able to be citizens in the national government. That is a ruling that he made to say that those people could not attain citizenship in the United States. Now, the reason he did this, Dred Scott, as you guys know the history of this case. Dred Scott had been held in slavery. He was given his freedom. The person who had ownership papers of him had given him his freedom and then died, and he was trying to get his freedom or whatever. And the Supreme Court, what they ruled is that since he could not even be a citizen, then he had no standing to sue. And so that was the impact for Dred Scott. This meant that Dred Scott didn't even have a right to use the United States courts since he was not a citizen. But this also went further and overturned any sorts of limits on slavery in any of the states. And so Roger B. Taney was attempting to allow states to just have slavery everywhere in the United States. And so this is the worst case that we have. Basically rules that African Americans could not be citizens. And this case is going to be overturned by the 14th Amendment. All right, so in these early courts, that's the first Supreme Court there. That is just the basement of the Senate. That's pretty sad. But the early courts, when they ruled in a way that helped the national government, then the other branches were like, oh, this is great. So they would follow what was going on there as long as the Supreme Court said the national government won. When the Supreme Court said that the national government should be limited, the rulings were often followed. You guys know the Andrew Jackson example. The court tells Andrew Jackson that he can no longer take away lands from Native American people in Georgia. And Andrew Jackson's quote is, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." So Andrew Jackson just ignored the Supreme Court. That was the normal action of presidents. Every president up until Harry Truman in 1945, all of these presidents ignored the Supreme Court whenever it limited their power. So going Abraham Lincoln, these people just ignored Supreme Court rulings that said you're not allowed to do that. So when the court would rule against the national government, they would ignore it. And when the court would rule for the national government, they would support it because it would give them a lot of extra power. Now, that is definitely an oversimplified version of the first 200 years of Supreme Court history, just about. That's all the stuff we have to worry about. We just really need to know the differences in those two courts' approach, and we know those cases already. So now we're going to jump way into the future. We're going to go to the middle of the 1900s and start to look at modern developments in the courts.